Welcome everyone to the Manchester Green New Deal podcast. My name's Adam Williams and joining me is half man, half mixing deck producer Andrew Glassford. How are you, Andrew?
I'm doing bloody amazing today, mate. The show's bloody ace.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to it. And one of Manchester's finest journalists, Alex King. How are you doing, Alex?
Bright and breezy. Thanks, Ads. It's
good to see you, mate.
Good to see you too. I'm very excited for tonight's show.
Back in 2015, an event happened that energised the British left in a way that hadn't been seen for decades. The UK Labour Party elected an avowed socialist as its leader, who then went on to create a movement that galvanised and stimulated politics, especially for the youth, like perhaps nothing that had been seen before. I am, of course, talking about Jeremy Corbyn, who was the leader of the opposition for 5 years and who, although history will record, never became our Prime Minister. It is my belief that he has sowed the seeds for left-wing leaders yet to come. Jeremy, a warm welcome to the show.
Pleasure.
Okay, so I'd like to start, if I may, with what I believe is a really underappreciated part of your leadership. And it's the fact that this podcast wouldn't have even been created had you not been leader. And Andrew, Alex and myself may never have even met. But it isn't because we all joined at the same time. It's because you trusted and empowered the membership. And through this empowerment, there was a genuine belief that anything was possible if there was a strong and coherent argument that could be made. That meant for members who were climate conscious like us, we were able to come together through groups such as Labour for a Green New Deal, who we're actually a part of and where we actually met, and genuinely push for the environmental change from within. This trust in the membership and your fortitude to back serious ideas that arose from this trust is what I think should have been a major part of your legacy had it been followed by those that came after you in 2019. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this in retrospect and what advice you would give Labour leaders going forwards in regards to how to get the best out of the Labour membership.
Thanks for that. And thanks for your points about the Green New Deal and the whole environmental issue. When we started discussing the Green Industrial Revolution, I sat around a table with Becky and a few other people. And Becky made a very good point, very strong point. She said, Jeremy, if this policy is going to work, it's got to appeal to all the people I represent in Salford. And that means those that work in polluting industries, those that are worried about the cost of environmentally sustainable food, etc. And the Green New Deal and Green Industrial Revolution has got to deliver for the poorest people in this country. And that's what it was all about. And I went to a lot of environment roundtables in the country, a brilliant one we did in Blackpool, where they talked about Preston New Road and fracking, talked about converting industries in Blackpool, talked about public transport, air pollution, recycling and all that, and about jobs that would be created from offshore wind. So it is about involving people. And I think the important part of what we were trying to achieve in the party was a democratic policy-making process, empowerment of the members at a grassroots level, but above all, the party being seen to be, through community organising, part of the community. And so now I'm obviously involved in all the issues facing my own community. When I go to the food hubs and food banks and the mutual aid volunteers, they're nearly all people in the Labour Party. They're nearly all people that were recruited since 2015 because they believe in that principle of community organising. We've got to challenge this government. And if this party is to win the election in the future, it won't be done because the Murdoch press approve of us. It won't be done because the Daily Mail decide not to give somebody a hard time. It'll only be done if you've mobilised the enthusiasm and the hopes of the people that entrusted us. And that's what I do. And that's what my project, the Project for Peace and Justice, does all the time.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Jeremy, for that summation of the importance of community organising. Just to look at the other side of the equation, which is state power in all of this. What did your experience of being leader of the opposition for 5 years tell you about the British state and its capacity to deal with climate change? Is it an issue we could tackle in, say, 5 years if the political will existed to do so?
I've just tabled a question for the discussion on COVID when the House returns from the recess. And I've asked the question, what will be our net emissions by 2030? Because I think we could achieve net zero by 2030. It is perfectly possible to do so. It does require investment. It does require change, but it is perfectly possible. And I will certainly be going to COP26 to push for that as well. When we did the environment debate during the election, I made all these points, and our manifesto was endorsed by environmental groups who said it was the greenest manifesto ever put before the British people, including Green Party manifestos. Now, there are a lot of vested interests in Britain, and a lot that will greenwash any argument or any debate, but in reality will export pollution and export damage to the environment by importing unregulated cheap goods from exploited workers in India, Bangladesh, China, many places, particularly in South Asia. And so the power of the British state to practice this massive deception is huge. Having read the government's own proposals, having read the climate change document from cover to cover, I'm convinced of two things. One is it is all achievable. But secondly, I really doubt the commitment of this government to achieve it. Because you can't, on the one hand, say you're promoting green public transport if at the same time you're promoting a new motorway network. The two things are incompatible. And whilst I do support electric cars, I do support cleaner vehicles. Obviously, we all do. Nothing is zero. There is an environmental cost to the manufacture of all vehicles. There is a huge environmental issue surrounding batteries and battery waste and recycling. And there are also issues about the way in which we measure our damage to the environment and pollution. I am very skeptical about incineration, for example, because it's seen as environmentally sustainable. It's not. It's burning plastics. It's burning other things. And whilst I'm constantly being assured by those that manage these incinerators, they're really quite clean, I remain to be convinced of that. We've got to change approach and attitudes. Young people get it. I go into schools and they get it. Now, can I give one very quick example? About 10 years ago, I went to a primary school in my constituency, and I was talking to these children. They're probably about 8, 9, something like that, about what was the basis of our living and environment security and biodiversity and so on. And they looked at me with totally blank faces. And I said to them, half joking, only half joking, I said, do you know what the most important animal in the world is? And they said, what? I said, it's the earthworm. Because without it, all Earth would be concrete. Slight exaggeration, but you get my meaning.
Yes.
And they sort of laughed at this, but it made them think. And they eventually started talking about it. I went to the same school last year, and I said to the kids, what do you think about biodiversity? Every hand in the class went up, and they gave me a lecture about biodiversity, which was brilliant. Great.
Yeah.
And that's how things have changed.
Moving away from that for a second, I kind of want to, you touched on it a little bit as well, talking about the trade unions and the Green New Deal. Obviously, several trade unions in the UK kind of represent people in heavy industry, and we have to move them away from that to get to like a zero carbon economy. How do you think we do that? How do we help move people in those industries away from the jobs that are harming the planet, and how do we bring the trade union movement with us to do that?
Well, it is quite difficult, and I remember being asked at the GMB conference in Hustings in 2015, what was my approach to fracking? I knew full well what the union's attitude to fracking was as a national policy, but I gave my answer that I was opposed to it because I believe it's damaging, pollutes groundwater, and is short-term and not necessary. And I said, and by the way, the jobs that you think you're getting out of fracking, you've no guarantee you're going to get them anyway, because you don't know where the steel's going to come from or where it's going to be, or where the turbines are going to be made, necessary for the towers rather. Yeah. And instead, I said that there's more jobs to be created by wind farms and wind turbines. And indeed, I believe that to be the case. And so it is about convincing people, but it's also convincing them that there is a security in it. So if we say to people in a currently polluting industry, two things: we'll guarantee your job. In return, we've got to convert this industry. So you deal with the problem areas, you deal with the steel industry. How much can you do by electric arc furnaces? How much can you do by hydrogen heating? There's a number of issues you've got to take. So we're not going to never use steel again, but you've got to look at where the energy source is going to come for it. And you do the same with transport and the same with chemicals and all the others, about reducing waste, reducing pollution, reducing packaging, and making sure there's maximum reuse. But then you take the whole thing a stage further, and I think the Labour movement must have this discussion and debate. If we are to benefit from all the technologies that are available, and we should, technology ought to be something that is for the benefit of all, not of great value to only the few. That does mean we've got to talk about what is a universal basic standard living, guaranteed basic income,
Yes,
or something like that, as a way of sharing things out. One other industry I'll mention, because it's important obviously in every way, but isn't necessarily the biggest employer in the country, is agriculture. Agriculture is efficient to a degree, but it also relies very heavily on pesticides and herbicides as a way of controlling weeds and plant growth. The set-aside policy is not all bad, because it does create a better area for biodiversity. But if at the same time you're allowing intensive use of the remaining land, it's of limited benefit. Now, I grew up in the country, and I feel very strongly about this, and I avidly read Farmers Weekly and look at the debates there that go on about neonicotinoids and so on. We have to have more sustainable farming. And if you read the books on rewilding, particularly the one written by Isabella Tree about her rewilding experience, you actually end up with greater biodiversity and greater productivity on remaining fields, because they have the very important natural balance of insect life there. So it's not some zany way out thing to rewild. It's actually part and parcel of improving agriculture.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, Adam here managed to get glyphosate banned by his local council because he saw the destructive qualities of it as a pesticide. So it's a really big thing that we care about on the podcast.
Well done, you.
True trailblazer.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I just wanted to shift the focus to your activism and your campaigning. So you were a dedicated activist in the anti-apartheid movement for decades, which, similarly to the climate movement, stood for values like justice, freedom and equality. And that was largely successful in toppling that regime. So what do you think the climate movement can learn from the anti-apartheid movement?
Don't set yourselves apart from the rest of the community in life. And don't threaten people. Try and bring them with you. Start in the schools. And I think most schools get it, and most young people do get it and understand that we cannot go on destroying the environment at the rate we are. We cannot go on encouraging global warming. And you have to give people practical examples. So somebody throws a plastic bag in a river. They've had a drink, throw the bag in the river and don't think about it. The plastic bag will be causing problems for centuries afterwards, because the plastic doesn't biodegrade, and it will end up being eaten in the fish and so on. And so you have to say to people, actually, pollution knows no bounds. You cannot wish it away and to go somewhere else. Everything has to be put away in a sensible and safe way. So you've got to encourage that. You also have to say to people that we just cannot go on as we are with this attitude towards the environment. It is a holistic one, which is why I believe in the green industrial revolution. Now, all the campaigning work I've been involved in all my life and still am involved with, anti-apartheid onwards. I mean, the anti-apartheid movement, yes, was huge and very popular around the time Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990. But I tell you this, in the 1960s, standing on a street corner in the Midlands, arguing against the South African apartheid cricket tour coming to Britain was not a popular thing to do. No. Speaking out against South African apartheid was not popular. We went through it. Likewise, I opposed the Gulf War in 1990-1991. I was one of only 15 or 17 MPs to vote against it. I regret that? No, not in the slightest. I thought it was the right thing to do, and you've got to be prepared to stand up and argue the case. But the one thing is, when you do make a stance, people notice it, and therefore, by noticing it, they're engaging in that discussion and that debate. And so it is about taking people with you. And that means having that patient discussion. Don't condemn people for having the wrong views. Condemn them for not listening to a different point of view.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, Jeremy, I know that you're a man that's steeped in the history of socialism, but for many of the great socialists of the past, climate breakdown was not known on the scale that it is today, and so it never really formed a core part of their understanding or their teachings. However, from what we know today, would you agree that environmental issues have now got to form a core part of any serious socialist vision, and what do you think that vision should be?
Socialism is environmentalism. I go back to William Morris. I go back to many of the 17th, 18th and 19th century socialists. And there's some wonderful works written by farm workers. John Clare was not particularly a socialist, but an interesting writer, poet, 19th century agricultural worker poet, who described the joy and the beauty of the countryside and his fears for the way it was being destroyed, hedges being grubbed up and so on, and so from land enclosure. And so I am very much with that tradition. The Labour Party and the Labour movement hasn't always been like that, because they always believed that industrialisation and industry was intrinsically a good thing. Now, I remember growing up in the Midlands in the 1950s when farm workers were paid about £7 a week, and they could almost double that by leaving the farm and going to work in a nearby factory as a machine minder. They earn more money, they had a better standard of living as a result of that. I could see absolutely why they did it. But you know what so many of them said to me? How much they missed the work they'd done before with the animals on the farm and everything else. And they loved that connection with nature. And so farming and farm workers are obviously very, very important. There's an old poster the Labour Party produced after the war, both wars, in fact. One of them said, "Smoke from factories, not from guns." It was bizarre. There was this picture of this factory belching out smoke, which somehow or other was supposed to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, that is probably better than smoke from guns, but you can see what I mean. There was no environmental consciousness there whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it's been a long, slow process. CERA has made long, slow progress, and that debate. I'll give you another example. I was a councillor in Haringey for 10 years before I became an MP. And it fell to me as Chair of Public Works, then as Chair of Planning, to represent the Council on transport policy. And there was a plan being put forward by the government of the day to widen the Archway Road, the A1, which links the North London with the M1. And so the idea was the council would support this, turning it into a dual carriageway, demolish a few hundred houses, take down a pub, blah, 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 blah. And I said, no, I'm opposed to its widening. They said, well, it's got to be widened. There's lots of traffic on it. There's traffic jams all the time. I said, widen it and you've moved the traffic jam further down the road. Big argument, big debate. That was part of a huge debate in London and around the country about motorways and road building. Do you know what? That road was never widened, and now there is less traffic on it than there was 20 years ago, thanks to the congestion charge, thanks to improvements in public transport brought about mainly by the Labour GLC led by Ken Livingstone. And so things can and do change, but you have to be prepared to have that long argument. At the moment, we're going through a big debate in my own community about low traffic neighbourhoods. I support them, and you get the most amazing debate about it, but you've got to engage in that discussion. Otherwise, are our children going to go on breathing foul air? Are we going to go on polluting our planet?
Hopefully not. To kind of go from that onto a wider kind of perspective, obviously climate change is a problem for all of humanity. Do you think organising internationally provides different challenges than national organising? And what advice would you offer to activists who want to start or join internationalist efforts?
You have to do both, because climate change has to be dealt with on a global scale. And that does mean discussions with our friends elsewhere. And so recently I was in a discussion with a group of Indian farmers. Well, two discussions. One was a discussion about their strike they're doing at the moment to try to protect their way of life. But the second was a group of Indian farmers whose land was being forcibly bought from them by coal mining interests, funded from where? The City of London. And so what they said to me was, what can you do to help us in campaigns and demands in Britain? So the International Mining Network, which has an office near here, is dealing with those kind of issues and campaigns on it. So you've got to link up with people trying to protect their own environments. And also look at the advice and financing given by the IMF, by the World Bank, by the G7, which at one level is full of nice sounding environmental messages, but in reality is something else. So why, for example, should Botswana now be faced with becoming the biggest coal mine in the world when it could be doing something so much better? Yeah. Why is Brazil still going on with destroying so much of the Amazon rainforest? Why is there so much wholly unnecessary and brutal logging being done in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Congo, and so on? It is about controlling global demand for those things, but it's also providing a sustainable way of life for the people that live in those areas. And that means our trade policies and our aid policies have to be part and parcel as that. So we have to challenge it at all levels. And I went to COP25 in Paris in 2015. The most interesting discussion was actually with the delegation from Bolivia. Absolutely fascinating, because the discussions they were having was about the effects of water supply in the Andes because of global warming. The glaciers go, the ice melts, there is no water supply for the summer.
Yeah, no water for La Paz, city of 2.5 million people.
Absolutely.
On the subject of climate justice, you appointed Labour's very first Shadow Minister for Climate Justice, Danielle Rowley, back in 2019. So it's clearly an important topic for you. Does the Peace and Justice Project encompass climate justice? And if so, how?
Absolutely. The Peace and Justice Project has 4 areas of work we're doing, and we've only been going since January the 17th, and we had 500,000 people come on the initial call, which I was very proud of getting that number. The 4 areas of work we're doing are media reform and media ownership, because if we can't get a media that will at least give us a fair hearing, we're going to enter problems in the long run. Yep. Secondly, environment and climate justice is absolutely part of it. So it's supporting the Green New Deal, it's campaigning, it's supporting local environment campaigns and roundtables, and also building up towards our presence alongside, we're not trying to take anybody over, alongside other campaigns and organisations in Glasgow when COP26 comes up. We're also dealing with economic justice, which is obviously linked to environmental justice, and we're dealing with international justice on issues of peace, disarmament, and human rights. So those are the 4 main areas of work, and we are obviously now supporting campaigns and organisations in opposition to the police bill, and issues like food banks and poverty around the country. So it's, in a sense, both the empowerment of people as well as the broader campaigning. And it's been a huge project to set up. I'm very proud of what we've achieved so far, but we've got a long way to go. But we have got many thousands of people involved, which is wonderful. And the idea is always to work with other people. So I do lots of Zoom meetings with many groups around the country. And as soon as the lockdown restrictions have been lifted a bit more, and it's not far away now, I'll be going around the country meeting people all the time.
Excellent. So, Jeremy, as you know, there's been many members that have left Labour due to the way that they believe you've been treated recently. Why, in your opinion, is Labour still the vehicle for progressive change in Great Britain? And what now needs to be done to make that change happen?
Labour was founded by a complicated series of discussions and negotiations between the trade unions, the many socialist organisations that existed in late 19th century Britain, and became the Labour Party formally in 1918 as a a federation basically between unions and constituency parties. It is obviously a complex and difficult organisation, but to me, it's the best vehicle we've got to bring about social change and social justice in Britain. At its best, the Labour Party is a brilliant organisation in the community and the grassroots level, but it does mean the party has to be more democratic in its activities and has to ensure its members get the voice. Because if members don't get a voice, can't influence what policy is, can't change policy, then they're simply going to go away. And they'll fight on single issue campaigns. Nothing wrong with single issue campaigns, but there has to be a political point to them at the end of it. So I would urge people, please, campaign together on all the stuff we're doing. Campaign together, but also let's make sure that we retain that huge presence and influence within the Labour Party. And whilst I was suspended, obviously deeply regretted that. I was reinstated fairly quickly by a national executive inquiry, and my temporary suspension from the PLP, I think, is completely wrong and unfair.
Our final question, Jeremy, thank you so much for your time. You've just touched on the Peace and Justice project, but what's coming up in the future? What are you working on right now, and what should we look out for?
What I'm passionate about is giving voices to other people, ensuring those voices that our mainstream media never report get a voice. Hence our campaigns on food hubs, on food banks, hence our campaigns for union recognition, hence our support for all of those. And a project we're working on at this very moment is campaigning against racism in every form, but giving refugees a voice. And this is the 70th anniversary this year of the Refugee Convention. And refugees are treated like enemies and a threat. They're not. They're human beings just like you and me in a different situation, different scenario. You could be a refugee, I could be a refugee. And so our project is to set up a global online voice with a voice from refugee camps all around the world, not of experts, not of aid workers, not of the UN, but of refugees themselves, saying what happened to them, the Rohingya in Myanmar, the people in Afghanistan, the people in Iraq, the people in Syria, the people in Honduras, those around the world that have had to flee in order to look for a place of safety. Stop treating them as enemies. Don't put the Navy in the Channel. Give them safety.
Amazing.
Jeremy, I think I speak on behalf of thousands when I say that you are perhaps the UK's biggest missed opportunity, mate. But thank you so much for your time today, and we wish you well on your project.
My energy is fully intact. Our principles are fully intact, and our determination is greater than ever to bring about a world fit for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
This part of the show is dedicated to the fighters, the healers, and the conservatives of the world that are doing their bit for all of us. It's the shout out. Jeremy, have you got a shout out for us this week, please?
I want to give a big shout out this week to all those who campaigned for the Shrewsbury 24. They've been doing it since 1972. They've stood for justice and they won. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that. And Alex, who have you got?
My shout out this week goes to author and activist Naomi Klein. It goes without saying there's no one out there who has done more to build an authoritative climate movement equipped with sound analysis and a constructive approach to the issue of climate change. And Naomi is certainly an inspiration for me. She's got a new book out called How to Change Everything, which looks really fascinating, and we'd love to get her on the show to talk about it.
Andrew, who have you got this week?
My shout out this week, ads, goes to the Manchester Meteor. Obviously, Alex is a journalist there, and it is a fantastic publication that's really based around local journalism and empowering people to get into journalism as well. They're a co-op. It's not just one guy who owns the place and tells you what the story is going to be. You know, its members decide what it's going to research and where the journalism is going to go into. We need more independent media in the UK. So please support the Meteor, and that's my shout out this week.
My shout out goes to Labour for a Green New Deal. As mentioned in the show, the members of this podcast wouldn't even have met had the space not been created within Labour for climate conscious activists to come together to create projects such as this podcast. So big shout out to Labour for a Green New Deal, and I would recommend any Labour supporter who cares about the environment to join your nearest group and help make Labour the most radical party on the environment in the UK. As ever, a massive thank you to everyone that is listening. We really appreciate the support. And remember, if you're helping the planet in any way, we love you, we appreciate you, and we really hope you'll join us again next week. Take care, everyone.